Okay, great. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna kick things off. Thank you everyone so much for coming. We really appreciate this. You know, in this age where it's difficult for us to meet in person, Zoom has given us a chance to at least see each other in some form and speak with each other in new ways. And as some of you may or may not know, my name is John de la Parra. I am the president of the Society for Economic Botany for this year. And one of the things that we started doing, and I really pushed the society to do, is to make sure that we're having regular check-ins through events just like this one, at least every spring and fall. And we've been doing that for about since the pandemic really started. We started last year. And it's been a great way for us to connect and bring in new folks who for the very first time might be interfacing with the Society for Economic Botany and some of the ideas and research that we're doing. So I'm so happy that we're able to have so many new faces joining in the discussions and on the work that we find so important. So I also want to thank all of the speakers that we're going to have today. So of course we have Pablo Eyzaguirre, who will be speaking as our keynote speaker, who is a very distinguished economic botanist. And you know, every year we get to choose someone spectacular. And this year we're particularly honored that Pablo is accepting this award. And we're so happy to have him. He will be introduced by Jan Salick, a former DEB herself, and also a former president of the Society for Economic Botany. But before we move on to that, I just wanted to appeal to everyone that's on the call now and to your friends to please consider joining and becoming a member of the Society for Economic Botany. If you're not a member, then go to www.econbot.org. We'll put the link in the chat and sign up for membership. There's a number of benefits, including our future events that we have. Of course, this one is open to everyone because we want to have this as democratized as possible and really get our message out to everyone. This one is free, but we will be having we expect to be having our conference in Jamaica at the end of May, early June. We're still finalizing those plans, of course, as the world evolves. We will have more specifics on that through the end of this year. But if you'd like to join there, you'll get discounted rates for attending and other benefits, including membership to your subscription to the journal, Economic Botany. And just being a part of this community is so important. It has been for me, and you'll hear how important it has been for our speakers as well. This year, we're putting a big emphasis, of course, on connecting people and opening up the society. In our last meeting of the council, we created a new committee for online symposia in particular, so that we can make sure that every year we have at least 2 events just like this one that bring together the wider community and appeal for membership, but also give you all an opportunity to hear from ethnobotanists, economic botanists from around the world in new and interesting ways. They've been a huge success so far. And as we had over 300 people sign up for this event, and as people are trickling in, we hope we get close to that today. But of course, since it's a free event, sometimes we don't get all those people there, but we hope that you all at least will become members of the society. We also created the position of a SEB social media manager, which will help us get the advertisements for this events like this out. So that will be supporting this whole effort. And finally, we've opened up nominations for all positions, elected positions and awards, so that, sorry, I'm just gonna mute you, Pablo, for 1 second. There's a little bit of background noise. So that everyone can have an opportunity to play a pivotal role in the society. In the past, the call for elections and awards hasn't been as open, and we hope to really support that now. And there's a number of awards that you'd also be eligible for if you join the society, including a new mid-career award for ethnobotanists and a new student award on top of the many other awards that we already have at the society. So I just wanted to mention a few things of those as benefits to joining. And once again, thank you everyone. And I think I've given enough time for us to reach some maximum participation here. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jan Salick, as I mentioned, former president of the Society for Economic Botany and distinguished economic botanist herself. Jan.
Thank you. And thank you for the honor of being allowed to introduce Pablo. I find inspiration a very wily critter. You know, it's hard. you find inspiration in unexpected places and with people you wouldn't expect. Artists often call them muses, but Pablo has always been and still does inspire me in so many ways. So being able to introduce him means a lot to me. Just the other day when we were, yesterday, I think, when we were talking about doing this, we started talking about sacred spaces. And, you know, this is something I study in biodiversity and old growth and culture and everything. But Pablo is going, let's forget that there's sacred. Being sacred is a thing in of itself. And he really made me think about it. And I'm not sure how sacred and botany fit together, but I'm thinking about it. So anyway, the point is, Daryl Posey actually made the same point to me when he was dying of cancer, and the idea of sacred was so important to him. So I think we can all think about that, how sacred fits in with what we do. I can't really remember where I met Pablo, and apparently Pablo can't remember either. I think either Harold Conklin introduced us. Of course, you know, Harold is famous for studying biodiversity and seed saving among the Hananu and the Ifugao. And he was one of our DEBs at one time. Pablo got his PhD and has taught at Yale. So that may have been the connection. Or Tim Johns, another former president of the Society of Economic Botany, who worked closely with Pablo, both in East Africa and in Rome. So I don't know, it's vague for all of us. It's sort of somewhere in the past, but it's been a lifelong important thing for me. So I really appreciate being able to say something about him. From his position as a senior scientist and program director at Bioversity, and by the way, I think in a meeting that is focused on careers, I think that thinking about these international careers is very important. You know, Bioversity is the International Center for Agrobiodiversity, for those of you who aren't familiar. But Pablo was able to coordinate parallel and comparative projects around the world, looking for universal practices that were common to all peoples everywhere. And that in itself is a fascinating thing. So, you know, home gardens, seed saving traditions, traditional agriculture and health, women in agriculture, and of course, biodiversity conservation. So, you know, looking at it from all different cultural perspectives, I think is just a tremendous addition for ethnobotany. He's also been biodiversity representative to international conventions and organizations such as the CBD and Future Earth and Man in the Biosphere and FAO. And I remember once we had a meeting at FAO where we were there, and Pablo takes me up to the rooftop of FAO, which is this amazing view of Rome. You look over the entire city of Rome. But the man has a sense of aesthetic that I really, really appreciate. Not only has he participated in SEB at various meetings, but he was also past president of the International Society of Ethnobiology. So, I mean, Pablo was trained in anthropology, but he's a good we're all crossovers. You know, I cross over from the other side, but we inspire each other from the different directions that we come. He's got many publications, very well cited and influential, especially the Home Gardens and Agrobiodiversity published by the Smithsonian. That is a wonderful book, but you can go on Google Scholar and see all those for yourself. In retirement now, Pablo applies ethnobotany on his farm in the Andean foothills of Chile to his family and his neighbors' gratification and enlightenment. I'm hoping that maybe I can get there and also once again be enlightened by Pablo. One last thing, Pablo knows how to eat. I remember he took me to lunch once outside of Rome in this stone villa, and we sat there for like 3 hours and ate lunch, and it was just course after course after course, and talked and talked, and it was wonderful. And he just the other day he said, if I asked for anything more from life, I would be a glutton. And so I think that uh, to have an appreciation for what we have all been able to do, and how ethnobotany has shaped our lives and how we have shaped ethnobotany is a wonderful thing, and nobody has done that more than Pablo.
Well, Jan, I asked you to speak because I don't like to speak too much about myself, but also because you inspired me, and I always mention that what got me interested in this field in ethnobotany was your work on cassava in South America, because I approached it in the African context, but your work took me back to the origins and the differences or not lack of differences between cultivated and domesticated, all these basic questions that at that time you were one of the few that was actually looking at it as a continuing and ongoing process. So this is why when John de la Parra called me or contacted me to say that I'd been nominated for this, I was truly elated. I mean, because it's nice to be awarded and recognized anytime, but to be awarded and recognized by those people that you've long admired. And this society is loaded with people like that. And, my professors, it meant a lot because it's coming from you, the members of this society. So, and also many of you have, been companions on my research and my activities along the way. So it really was an ecstatic experience, I must say, when I heard it, and I'm so happy to be able to share some of my changes along the way, taking me back to some fundamental notions of sacredness, of the need to continue evolving with our relationship with plants, in agriculture and food, we must never consider ourselves consumers. We're always actively involved in how crops and plants evolve and become part of our lives. So I guess there's not much I can teach you, you people, because you've taught me so much and you know the field. But what I can do is talk a little bit about my own personal evolution, my growth and understanding as I began to be engaged in ethnobotany, in economic botany. And, before I worked I taught for a while, but then I worked in Holland at an institute that was actually about political economy and how agricultural research in developing countries could begin to transform and develop the agricultural sector in various countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And that was very useful training for me because I got to see what the formal sector in research and science was doing in a range of countries. I had a project focused on small developing countries, about 60 of them. And I came to know their economic sectors extremely well and the research sectors extremely well. And from there, I saw this job opening at IPCRI, which was for a social scientist, which was quite an important step for these kinds of research. It was filled with geneticists and plant breeders. And the recognition that so much of what we need to know and develop in the genetic improvement of crops has a social basis, that many of these materials are in the hands of farmers, that what is useful to improve and what's useful to not and to maintain are all social and cultural decisions. So I was fortunate to get that job. And interesting, my career as an ethnobotanist was launched in 1995. It seems like a long time ago, at the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing, where we produced the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, in which 189 countries signed. And it remains perhaps the most important global policy document on the role on gender. There were 17,000 participants at the conference and another 30,000 people milling about and to listen. This was in Beijing. So it was quite a start for me what to say about ethnobotany. So I began in preparation for that, looking at those crops. Oh, yeah. So then I began looking at here. Yeah, this is where I'm speaking from. I'll move that. That should come towards the end. Yeah, so I began to focus on those crops which didn't have a place in the literature yet, which were often considered either hunger, famine foods, they were called, or they were even considered undomesticated, or they were considered often even toxic. Some like the species that are commonly consumed in West and Eastern Africa from the Solanum nigrum complex. So, and yet when I was out in the field and what I had known earlier from my work with the policy work in Isnar in Holland, when I went, there was a tremendous amount of these foods in the market. I saw that women were the main producers, that they were developing seed systems, selecting different types and varieties. So something that was not considered even cultivated was in fact in practice by women farmers being developed, selected, seed systems were selected, and it was being exported from Douala to London, to Paris and other places. So how can this thing be so neglected when it's so ever present in the field? And it's simply because the people who were the main custodians of these crops were women. And so that was my first work was really about bringing these voices and these perspectives and these people and let their voices be heard. And then this, in many areas, I continued this work. And it goes back to one of the, I guess, the three fundamental reasons I started in this work and what I brought to it. First, I brought a big lacune, a big bag of ignorance along with me, so that I was eager to fill. So I was always thirsty for the knowledge that other people, and I didn't care where I got it. If it was a farmer, I'd go to the libraries, I'd go to speak to the researchers, but often I got the most knowledge to fill that gap that I had in the field. The other thing was kind of what I'd learned as an anthropologist, the desire to bring attention to the voices and ways of life of rural people in marginal areas. Those people that are forgotten, we don't see or hear, and when we're compiling sort of historical or scientific documents about what goes on in these places. So I always had this desire to bring new voices, and especially neglected voices, through either inequity or gender bias or colonialism, have been ignored. And this then led me to, the work on leafy vegetables was African based, but it spanned several countries: Senegal, Cameroon, Kenya, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and everywhere we saw similar practices, that these leafy vegetables, which have a short shelf life, really that whole chain was in the hands of women, from the technology, from the development, the science of it, to the actual marketing. And it was much bigger than we thought. And then it also led me to other, there were other crops like that. For example, gourds, and we forget that a lot of cultivation, the first cultivars were often gourds, because when you're not necessarily sedentary and you have to move around to get your food and water, the thing that you miss most is having a container to carry foods in, to bring foods back, to carry water. And it seems, how could we not have thought that containers were probably the first thing you need? It's nice to have a crop, but if you've got nothing to carry it back home with, it's, what use is that? So there was a tremendous diversity, and these are Lagenaria species, which are also found in Asia. But this was another area where, again, women were really at the heart of this development of gourds. And often, this was in Kitui in Eastern Kenya. And it was very interesting working with the women because they were very conscious of their role, very conscious of the cultural importance of their knowledge, and the economic potential as well. They said, "Why don't you help us set up a museum about kitete?" That's the name they use for the gourds, because they were also useful as crafts and useful in the tourist trade. So in all of these were plants that had multiple uses. These gourds, you could eat the leaves as vegetables. When a fruit develops, that's also edible and used in soups and stews. The seeds were also eaten, and you could see a whole range of seed types. And these were quite distinctive and well-known and documented. And again, one of the things that went through when I was looking at these neglected or underutilized species. I don't like the word underutilized because sometimes they're underutilized for a very good reason. They belong in a specific niche, or they have a specific time when they're useful, and other times when they're not. But in any case, they have multiple uses. So being from the Americas, there was a crop that I'd been familiar with, which is the chayote. I don't know. It's often found in Whole Foods and Trader Joe's in North America. But as I traveled through different countries and investigating different cultures, you'd see that same plant had different uses. In Southeast Asia, when our meetings, where Jan was also at in Chiang Rai, there the main use of chayote is for the tendrils and the leaves in making soups, and the gourd in medicinal soups. In China, right across the border, that same chayote, Sechium edulis, is used as a root crop. In Central America, it's a fruit crop. So the point is that what is a significant feature if it's used in different ways in different places? It's the cultural knowledge that exists and the perception, and we all perceive crops in different ways from our cultural perspective. I mean, going back to Darwin, he used the phrase in one of his books, I'm misquoting him because I don't have it here before me, but crops are domesticated and evolved to suit man's fancy and needs. And we often forget that there isn't anything intrinsic in a plant, in an economic use of a plant, without understanding the cultural vision that we bring to that plant. And some things are considered sacred, and meals are considered sacred. So that was an important finding. And then I guess the third aspect of my background as an anthropologist and my training, particularly that came from two professors as an undergraduate in City College, New York, there was Eleanor Leacock, who studied northern hunter-gatherers, and then June Nash, who looked at Mayan peoples in the Central American rainforests. And one of the things that came through on this is that in every case there is an ordered vision to the world. There's an ordered vision to the natural world, which we now use the term Cosmovision, which I think is a very important concept to maintain and to explore more fully. And so I got that concept embedded in me, in my mind, and then went to study with Hal Conklin and Michael G. Smith of Jamaica. And there they took that, I took that knowledge, and they gave me a very important tool that went along with my ignorance and thirst for knowledge. That tool was to be able to find what are the distinctive traits in things that distinguish one from another. And I need to say here, as human beings, we are notoriously bad at this. We do believe in traits and we do distinguish, but we don't pick the significant ones, whether it's in terms of distinguishing among people. We don't pick the significant traits to differentiate one from another. Certainly, if you look at race, that's the most stupid of traits to begin to classify our species. But even with plants, so that coming from the world of agriculture, which was how I started my work in ethnobotany, we classify already these plant foods into root crops, root and tuber crops, leafy vegetable crops, fruit crops, grains, pseudo grains, pseudo cereals, and yet any one of these crops can be approached from a different perspective. So one of the interesting things with cassava and sweet potato, because I began my work in West Africa, the most common use I saw of these crops was often on the daily basis was leafy vegetables. So that cassava leaf and sweet potato leaf, if you're living in Sierra Leone, you eat it every day. So that the value of the crop from a household economic perspective is in the leaves. And yes, the roots and tubers are important, but so is the leaf. And when you think about improving the crop, do you think about improving the roots or the leaves? There's a trade-off, because what we were seeing, for example, from the Leafy Vegetables Project, was that women were selecting, and some of the things they were selecting, some, for example, even a species of cowpea, Vigna unguiculata. And in that one, they were selecting the plants for leafy greens. What does that mean? They're playing with phenology. They're selecting plants for that flower later. They're selecting, and they create populations of late flowering legumes, which then produce poorly for the legume, but are actually very productive for leaf. And these kinds of trade-offs are being done all the time. But in agriculture, we say, cowpea or black-eyed pea, as it's known in America, is a legume. Yes, but it's also a leafy vegetable. So these kinds of things have to be brought into the scientific literature about how crops are used in a variety of ways. And we began to work on developing some ethnobotanical indicators to make sure that whenever we begin to document the crop, we look at all the parts of the plants that are used. We don't go in there, the notion, I'm looking at a root crop, I'm looking at a leafy crop. And we do this, and then again, I think my first in-depth look into a single crop species, which would be more the traditional economic botanist's way of doing it, was with taro, which was my first and remains my love. It's a wonderful crop. It's one of the oldest domesticates if we look in human history. But for example, we're starting to work in Yunnan, working with some wonderful, wonderful people at the Kunming Institute of Botany. Yang Yongping, for example, was my constant teacher and companion in this work. We found that that there was tremendous diversity, that people were developing not necessarily from crossings or genetic diversity, but from clonal variation, just a spontaneous variation that would occur not through the reproductive system, but from different types, because it's a rather unstable genome. And from this, they selected a huge diversity. So the plant in the end, the plant, every single part of the plant could be used. From the leaf, of course, which is my wife, Eve, who many of you know, is Trinidadian. So there, the national dish is callaloo, which is made with taro leaves. And so that the leaf is important in many cultures, the roots, but it's also, for people that like pickling, as many in my family do, there's a lot of the stolons, which are considered not useful in many places, are used as pickles. And then there's all different forms. And the selection was often done on aesthetic grounds. And this brings me to another colleague I met, well, not a colleague, it's more my sensei. I met from Kyoto, at Kyoto University, a geneticist. His name is Sadao Sakamoto sensei, who was one of Japan's leading geneticists on food crops, rice and taro. And he always used to tell his students, I will not let you muddle in this crop, try to change it until you understand what it means in all its aesthetic beauty, in its taste, and all. And he worked with another of your a distinguished economic botanist, Roy Ellen, and produced a book, but he classified a whole range of crops as the sticky starch complex. And here's a geneticist, instead of looking genome per genome or allele per allele, said it's sticky starch that we were trying to domesticate. Whether we got sticky starch in rices, whether we got sticky starch from taro, from other crops, but the nature of the starch molecule is what we were playing with. And that really stuck in my mind, that we really need to incorporate also the social and cultural classification of why we use crops in certain ways. And the most important thing that came out of my long association with taro, it's kind of a love affair, is that it's always evolving. And even as we were in Yunnan, a new undocumented use, as Yunnan was developing commercially, as Kunming, which had been a beautiful little city, had become a massive mega city, there was a huge demand for vegetables and luxury vegetables, because there was a lot of money being made, mainly out of growing and selling tobacco internationally. But one of the things we kept seeing was from the farmers is that the flour, taro flour, was being marketed. We saw trucks and vans with lorries, bicycles, all carrying it into Kunming City, and to restaurants as really a prized luxury vegetable. And taro, again, if you look at the literature, it's a vegetatively propagated crop, and flowering is seldom mentioned as a key and distinctive trait. And yet, for the farmers of Yunnan, it was a distinctive trait, because they found that the flower itself, before it opens up, to be extremely tasteful, like asparagus. And this is what, if we keep the crop in its cultural context, in the landscapes and taro can be grown in a variety of landscapes, which makes it such a beautiful crop to study. But if you look at this, we are safe. I feel we're confident that things will continue to evolve in a good way. Unfortunately, we have the global market. And if you see on this slide on the bottom, Japan is a big market for taro in China and in many other places, because of different festivals where, wonderfully enough, it has a specific and important cultural value for at certain times of the year. So, and then one type of taro is selected that produces very large and useful side corms. And that's the one, and you see these people working on this single type of taro, developing for a single market, and there doesn't look to be much diversity or joy or creativity in that process. But that's, this is the nature of the crop. But as long as we have people wanting, as you say, the whole schmear, the whole diversity of that crop in their hands, in places where it originated, in Southeast Asia, in Bangladesh, Burma, Myanmar, then we are in safe hands. La próxima. And again, moving on to other foods and crops, there came out in one of my close colleagues and someone that I'm extremely grateful, Olga Linares, who's a member of the National Academy of Sciences in the US and leading director at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, was one of the editors of the book Lost Crops of the Incas, Lost Crops of Africa, and these things. And I think it's a very wonderful, it's a catchy title, because this timed with it was coincident with the appearance of the Indiana Jones movies. So everybody was looking for lost worlds, lost crops, as if we were so negligent to have left our crops somewhere and we didn't know where they were. But they were always there. But the thing is that many of they had tremendous qualities, quinoa, fonio, finger millet, but they had been neglected by science as we focused on just a few foods. So I felt it was very important to not only to highlight their potential, but more importantly, to keep them within the cultural and the ecological context in which they had developed. So that, for example, there's a big boom now with calling them superfoods. So, for example, you can get quinoa now in almost every supermarket in North America. But it's only one type of quinoa. And there are many. This is just a quinoa from one field in Bolivia, Proxima. And then you can see all the different types. But of course, the market, for some reason, just seems to prefer white and fluffy. That's just the nature of market. The modern market looks for white and fluffy. There's a few white and fluffy varieties of quinoa, but there's many more, many of them with different properties, nutritional and taste and cooking qualities. And so that was, I think it's important as the world moves to this search for new foods, power foods, superfoods, that we have to pay special emphasis to keeping these foods and plants in their centers of origin or centers of diversity. And it doesn't necessarily mean origins. I remember when I was at ISNAR, I had many wonderful colleagues from Cote d'Ivoire, and we used to have long, drawn-out arguments that often got heated about how can cassava be not from Africa? It has to be African. We ate it every day. He says, no, it's from South America. No, no, no. Same thing with maize in some places, which should be better known. So it doesn't matter. I said our arguments were really senseless, because the fact is that when maize came to West Africa, it acquired new traits because it was in a new cultural environment. It was in a new natural environment, and that was good. And cassava, for example, or manioc, or yuca, as we call it in Spanish, when it went to West Africa, it also, in Central Africa, it acquired new traits. People there really selected varieties from which the leaves were edible, that they didn't build up the cyanins that were so toxic. And I remember when some of the early research, when I was working with UNICEF on the food and nutrition of women and children in Guinea-Bissau, we would stop when we were hungry, go by the side of a river, and people would just pull out cassava plants and wash off the root and then munch on them like carrots, raw. And I said, isn't that supposed to be poisonous? And it wasn't. So I think a lot of people pay a lot of attention to phenology. It can become poisonous at different stages in the growth. It's the same with leafy vegetables. But there were many things I kept learning along the way. But one of them is that as crops spread around the world, if we keep them in some kind of cultural context, new things will develop. Even in the last part of my years when I was working in Italy, how do you tell an Italian that, especially from central and southern Italy, that tomatoes are not really Italian, that they only arrived in the 1750s to Italy? It's hard for them to conceive. But in that time, the Italians in southern Italy, particularly around Naples, did develop the San Marzano and other varieties that have distinctive traits, because it went into a culture. So that when, even here in Chile, when I plant tomatoes, when we want the tomatoes for sauces, they're all under the name of Tomate Roma, Tomate San Marzano. But they did develop, there was a culture that was able to take the tomato and make it into something that was quite distinctive in terms of low water content, process, even though it's an origin in northern Chile. Its basic origin is in northern Chile and southern Peru and parts of Bolivia and Central America, several different domestications. But people can adopt a crop and keep the evolution and the diversity alive. So at that point, then my whole thinking became that really crop focus is good, but crop maintenance and diversity has to depend on a landscape approach and a biocultural landscape, not just a landscape, but this is a drawing from some village, maybe about 40 kilometers outside of Cochabamba in Bolivia. And it just had farmers draw the landscape that they saw. And each one of these, it's concerning one crop, which was potatoes, which there are many, many varieties and even species of these tubers in Bolivia. And each one of these niches that you see is associated with a particular type of potato. And they would never think of growing potatoes if they couldn't have access to all these different niches. And talking back to what Jan said about the sacred part is the top. There's actually an old Inca temple at the top of the hill, because Cochabamba is a Quechua-speaking area. And the potatoes, when they become tired, la papa está muy cansada, ya no tienen, and it's a buildup of viral diseases and things like that, they take it to the top of the mountain, where in that sacred space, it heals, and then they bring it back down after several years there to be planted again, and that healing process takes place in that sacred environment. Now, if I were a utilitarian, I would say, well, isn't that the ultraviolet radiation that is high, that is more intense at the high mountain and tends to clean the crop from the viral diseases? Perhaps, but it could easily well be the sacred environment. So, so every landscape has, it's a landscape, the Germans call it Landschaft, is actually a mental concept, because we can talk about the geophysical landscape. But when this lady in Eastern Kenya is looking at her landscape, she sees the whole thing knit together. And my colleague Maundu and Morimoto's, they actually mapped out every single spot, and everyone has its name and spots in this landscape. I took out the actual drawing and naming of the places because it looks too busy. But every one of these places is a distinctive niche, which is central to the survival of that community. And so this landscape approach is something then we began working with conservation agencies such as the Man in Biosphere program, and within the Convention on Biological Diversity, there was an initiative in Japan called the Satoyama Initiative, which we also began to work with, the biocultural landscapes and resilience. And that was sort of and then after, so then we left it there, and I think it's continued. I think the concept of conservation, not so much species by species, but maintaining these vital landscapes where the culture and the species and even the introductions get incorporated into a new cultural and edible version of the landscape. And so then now I retired in 1995. The beginning of 1995, I came back to Chile, where my wife was already working in advance. Yes, I did. December. My daughter says I didn't retire in 1995.
I was born in 1996.
Oh yes, you're right. Oh my goodness. Thanks for daughters. Yeah, I retired in 2005. I began my work
2015.
2015. My notion of time has become really Andean, very circular. So 2015. So then I came, and now I have, in many of my ideas about diversity, what I try to cultivate is diversity. So we began with maize and some of the crops that had been important in this region. When we bought this farm 22 years ago or 20 years ago, it had been used for by producing maize seed for DuPont and DuPont Pioneer and all the major seed companies of North America. And the place was just a mess, just an industrial mess. There were no worms. And the first thing I did, to try to recover what maize is about. So we began growing just open pollination of these mazes, and we got a great deal of variety and diversity. And people would ask me, where are these mazes from? Because they had never seen them in the region. Said, they're from here. This was what we had before. We began to concentrate only on the white, fluffy maize. And these are the purple maize, which is a wonderful, for those of you who've been in Bolivia, wonderful drink. Api can be made, api morado. And then also we have a home garden that produces these wonderful fruits and distinctive varieties of fruit species that were here, fruit varieties that were here 20, 30 years ago, that are, peaches that are purple all the way through, apples that are red inside and out, grapes. This is a wonderful area for plums. It happens to coincide with the last few years when I was working in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, where many of these varieties were present. I managed to smuggle a few in to Chile to plant on the farm. Don't tell FAO. or the, and then, so this is where I come back, and now as I'm in this latter part, as I said, I don't ask for more except for this to be able to be in this very intimate and daily relationship with nature. It's so nurturing. Lying on the ground, I actually feel Pachamama coming in and giving me strength. I hug trees. I know I'm not ashamed anymore or embarrassed about it. And many of the things, are sacred, being in these spaces where evolution is going in, until we recover that intimate relationship. We shouldn't separate. We're not just consumers of nature, of crops, of foods. We have to be engaged in understanding, at the very least, if we can't produce them ourselves, where they come from, that we only select a small portion, and why we do that, understanding. So I must know. No, yeah. So this is where I think the stage is. We have to continue to do the work. We've only documented a portion of the diversity that's available in our food systems, that's available for our food systems, it's available in our landscapes. We have to conserve those landscapes where this process is intimate and ongoing between people, the plants, the varieties, and look at the people who are doing these experiments, who are often women, who don't go to meetings all the time, who aren't the first ones to speak to the visiting scientists or researchers that come to their field, but they're often the ones that are actually handling and selecting the seeds. And why we began to work with Timothy Johns of Canada, Montreal, so much more is that the reasons that people were coming up for why maintaining diversity, that was not economic, because we have varieties that produce more, that require less work, that require less attention, but people kept growing traditional varieties, which sometimes were, to use the word, uneconomic, but they devoted time to it. They brought it into their home garden when it no longer had a place in the fields. And the reason they often gave for this was the taste. It tastes good. And I'd like to end with someone that, before I was actually working on ethnobotany myself, it was actually during my time at ISNAR, when I was working with researchers in small countries, and I came upon, there was a wonderful, wonderful couple, Mohammed Danya and his wife, who was the head nurse of Freetown, and he ran a research station in Kenema on roots and tubers. So I went to visit his research station, and we went out there, and then let's take you through the process. So he took me to this little shed that was stuck on the back of the research building, where there were lots of wood fires and big pots. And now at that time, there were many institutes, 2 or 3 institutes in the CGIAR that were working on roots and tuber crops. IITA, there was CIAT in Colombia, and they were all developing cassava cultivars, mainly aimed at root production, and sending it to this institute in West Africa that was specialized in roots and tuber crops. So he had tons of varieties to test. And he said, let me take you to where we start. And I saw this shack with these pots and these ladies sitting around the fire. And he says, the first thing we do, we take all the varieties that we get and we cook them. And that we invite the ladies who we know from the region are the best cooks and know how to prepare these. And then we see, and we taste them, and we see if they like them. When they find something that's tasty, that's easy to cook and process, that's the one we work on. And then we go to the lab. And I thought that was such a beautiful experience. And in fact, he is he was one of the victims of the violence he and his wife in Sierra Leone. And he remains to me a living force of listening to the people first and using your scientific knowledge to recognize that they're central and to produce. He spent the latter, when the Civil War broke out, he closed down his station. He moved his work into the refugee camps in Freetown, which was then crowded with refugees, and began producing seeds and food for the refugees, and his wife, of course, in the hospital. And they were among the first victims targeted by the rebels when they came in. So this work is a passion, but it also has great rewards. And I think the greatest reward of my work was in the people I've worked with. I've never thought I would have such a privilege to be with such wonderful people who kept on teaching me and stayed with me all these years. Jan, I see that Howard and Pat are there. And this is, I think, when you're working in a field, it's the human connections with the people who are in the field and the people that accompany you along. I've been very, very fortunate, and I just want to thank again the society and you all for giving me the opportunity to join with you in this work, and that at the end, I'm just terribly grateful for the experiences, and I think that seeing more and more people get into this perspective that there's a lot more diversity that's available than we use, and often our narrow uses of it actually ends up being destructive to the diversity that remains, because we occupy more spaces. We don't respect the landscapes and the cultures that are generating this tremendous store of diversity that we needed so much more. And to see the society and some of my work, and on in situ conservation with my colleagues at Bioversity, I wasn't one of the contributors to that, but it was led by Devra Jarvis, and there were other breeders like Bhuvan Stapit of Nepal, who were the real moving forces behind this. It's just, it's important. I see so many more people joining our movement. I see it as a movement as well as a scientific endeavor and a privilege. So again, John, who wrote me that note inviting me for this, thank you so much. I thank my daughters they wrote me all kind of notes so I wouldn't make a fool out of myself. So I thank them too for the technical support, and with that, and my mother, my wife. Yeah, I get confused.
Well, Pablo, thank you so much for that incredibly moving and important talk that I think will inspire a whole other generation of work as well. We have so many students also that are on the call. So I want to open it up. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So if anyone has a question, I'll ask you to go down to the bottom of your screen where it says reactions and raise your digital hand. That'll be the easiest way for me to get to you. Or of course, put your questions in the chat as well. We're already seeing a lot of comments. Wendy says, this is one of the best, most interesting talks I remember ever seeing. Thank you so much. So I can't agree more, having seen several DEB talks. If you do want to put a question in the chat, make sure that you change your name to your correct name. So some people I see still have not changed their name. Right click on your video and you can rename yourself. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Pablo? And while we're waiting for questions to come in, Pablo, I might ask, are there any projects that you didn't get to, but that you really think are important that you would like to see worked on?
Yeah, I would like to see a global study of sacred places in the environment, because we're always trying to find out what are the key areas for conservation. I think societies and cultures have kind of taken a lead on that by declaring certain places sacred. Ethiopia has the sacred gardens around the Coptic churches. Almost every culture has these places. I remember during my own field work, people would tell me, no, we can't plant there. That place has a lot of spirits. And I didn't pay attention. I was too much, wanting to be the young scientist. And, but I realized now I pay attention. I look back, I said, I really missed a lot. So I think just take it at face value. If it's sacred, just look at it and study them, support them, stop governments from not recognize them, stop developers from building tract housing on them. Just a world study on sacred places, and make this. And also, I would like to do some work on those specific food policies that exist in food subsidies and things like that, that are working against the maintenance of diversity in specific crops. So if you have a program on maize improvement in a country, and lots of people have, there's a lot of money there that goes every day to many farmers, get subsidized around the world by major seed companies, and we should have at least a third of what they spend on promoting single crops to defending and protecting and getting better understanding of the diversity that they're not using. And that's part of the work I think that Deborah and the group at the Platform for Agricultural Biodiversity, you know, they're working on this, but a lot of that. And then I think also so those would be the two things: sacred places, and let's look at what is not being used in formal ways, and look at the other way. You know, we think that what isn't appearing in supermarkets, let's look at it.
Wonderful, thank you. I just want to say here's a question from Heike Vibrance. Let me just read through this. I agree leafy vegetables are really important in food for nutrition, taste, and enjoyment. However, they are really getting rare in the urban food systems, often because they require more work to prepare. Have you seen any examples of leafy vegetables expanding their reach and fans, perhaps by giving them the image of gourmet?
Yes, they have. And I mean, the case which we started in Bioversity in '96 with Professor Shweya of the University of Nairobi, and people that has been a success story. I think if you see in Kenya, leafy vegetables, traditional leafy vegetables, locally developed leafy vegetables are going to market daily. They're found in supermarkets now. I think something similar is taking place in Cameroon. I know that certainly in parts of Nigeria, yes, they are. The other thing is, I think we should, we have markets, the multiple uses of the crop need to be promoted, and they can be, because people are harvesting sweet potato, but there's also sweet potato leaves, which are very, very important in Philippines, Sierra Leone, other countries. They're not important in Latin America, interestingly, where the crop originated. But I think these would be the two. There are successes, and there's even a lot of work being done by nutritionists and food technologists in many parts of the world on how to make these vegetables easier to work. So that there is I think in the interview that Lucas published in the newsletter recently, it talks about how we have to recognize that, cooking practices and time availability has changed in the urban setting, but there are ways to make these traditional leafy vegetables transition into the urban market. They have the advantage that they don't need a lot of space, and they can be grown close to the market. I think that's another advantage that we can focus a bit more to make them more accessible.
Great, thank you so much. We have time for just one more question, and I see Paul Kamau Mbagua has raised his hand. So Paul, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John. And that's a great talk from Pablo. Thank you so much. A wealth of information here for us. I just wanted to ask, now in terms of conservation, one of the things that we have been talking, I teach at the university, we tell students one of the ways of conservation is get the plant from the wild, domesticated, distributed, ensure that it's everywhere so that it doesn't get depleted from the wild. I don't know what your experience is or how this model works, because there are quite many issues that come in, and I would like to get from your experience, what is your view on this one? Thank you so much. Otherwise, the leafy question, the leafy vegetables in Nairobi, yes, that's very correct. I'm in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, this is, I think one of the important points that I wanted to get across was that plant domestication is an ongoing process. We must not see it as something that stops. Even with crops that are major crops now, like maize and rice, there are still varieties out there that have traits that we need that are existing either as land races or that crossings between wild relatives and land races. So I think that we have to just not necessarily take the plants out of their natural environment to domesticate them, but there is a role for some certain type of agriculture around protected areas or reserves. And that's some of the work we did with in Cuba, for example, on man and biosphere reserves and in other places, to find those areas where there's an ongoing interaction between wild and cultivated plants. And we see this in Ethiopia, for example. People understand where wild and cultivated can exchange alleles, like in the case of sorghum. Ethiopian farmers do in areas of parks and reserves in Ethiopia do plant fields there consciously to benefit from the gene flow between the wild sorghum, which has problems in terms of consumption. It doesn't produce much, but it has traits about resistance and flavor. So I think these processes already exist. Certainly scientists and like you can contribute to that enormously in terms of the formal practices and knowledge that we need to know to promote and select from this transition. But the important thing is not to make it a dead-end process. We should keep this revival of participatory plant breeding and crossings from wild to domesticated an ongoing process. But yes, it's an important question, and we've looked at that and I think some of the work in Cuba and particularly in also in Southeast Asia on rices in Nepal, some of the work that the in situ project of Bioversity did in Nepal showed a lot of the interaction between land races, some cases some wild species of rice. So yes, try to focus it on proximity to the natural areas and not necessarily take it outside its context.
Thank you. Thank
Great.
you very much.
Thank you, Pablo, so much. I really appreciate that. Sorry for the background noise. I really appreciate that, and we are so honored that you were able to accept this award, and thank you for being our Distinguished Economic Botanist for this year. We all extend our congratulations and thanks to you. So thank you all. We saw so much in the chat supporting this, and I see everyone clapping. I'll join in with that as well.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm still very, very elated by the whole thing. And I please, if you're ever in Chile, it's far away, do give me a call. I'm not on Facebook. Like Jan said, I'm boycotting. But there are other means to reach me, good old fashioned email and things like that. But your beloved colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll say, this is one of the first talks I've seen where we've actually increased participants as time has gone on rather than lose participants. So you really captured the audience attention. Great. So we're going to move on to the next portion of our gathering today, which will be focused on our panel. And it will be moderated by Betsabe Castro Escobar, who I will pass it to in just a moment. But I wanted to briefly just mention who our panelists will be, and they will introduce themselves as well with Betsabe moderating. So Lisa Offringa, Sonia Peter, Annie Vernig, Anna Herforth, and Mark Plotkin are all part of our panel today. And it might take me just a minute, but I'm going to move to highlight them on everyone's screen and remove the spotlight from Pablo. But Betsabe, if you wanted to kick things off, I'll do the logistics.
Thank you, John. And Thank you. Muchas gracias, Pablo. We really, really enjoyed your talk today. I definitely learned a lot and feel very inspired as a younger career ethnobotanist. So my name, as John mentioned, is Betsabe Castro Escobar. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Integrated Biology at UC Berkeley, and I'm a Caribbean ethnobotanist, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's panel. And I'm going to be inviting speakers. What I want to do is call on one speaker, and I would love that speaker to take at least 1 minute to introduce themselves, and then that speaker passes it along to another speaker. Sorry to cold call, but I'll cold call the first speaker, and then from there on, that speaker hands it off to the next speaker. Okay?
And that's I wanted to add one thing. I can only add one additional highlighted individual at a time, so I'll have to keep moving them as each person's talking, but hopefully they'll just float to the top of everyone's screen as they talk.
I think they will, so I think we're
great.
good. All right, so I'm gonna call on Sonia Peter.
Thank you very much, Betsabe. I want to begin by extending greetings to all of the SEB members and those who are here in attendance. And I also want to express my congratulations to our DEB. I was thoroughly engaged from the beginning, and really beautiful history of his work and the importance of his work. So again, I'm Sonia Peter. I am the director of the Bicultural Education and Research Program in Barbados. My main focus is promoting the conservation of our local biodiversity through the platforms of education and research. And I think Betsabe had some really lovely questions to unearth more of the reason behind why I would establish a nonprofit with that title and my work platform. So I'm going to reserve the remainder of that for the question period. And I think I'll hand over to Annie.
Great, thank you, Sonia. John, I hope this doesn't mess with your logistics too much. I'm connected via audio through my phone and using my computer video.
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Betsabe and Sonia, and also Pablo, mil gracias por su presentación. It was a wonderful way to start this Saturday. So my name is Annie Vernig. It's so wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces that I haven't seen in a long time. And just to quickly introduce my role, I am an advisor on science and policy for the UN Development Program, and I co-lead a lot of our projects around using spatial data and maps to support mainly governments in their planning around where to protect, manage, and restore nature. And I'm also an advisor to the UNDP Equator Initiative, which works to recognize and advance Indigenous peoples and local communities within UN systems and at the national level as well. So it's such an honor to be here alongside this amazing panel and look forward to the conversation. And I pick Lisa.
Thanks, Annie. It's so lovely to be here. What a wonderful talk, and learned so much about your research, Pablo, and your journey. It was really inspiring. And I'm going to mirror Annie's comments that it's just wonderful to see all the names and friends that we've missed over the last maybe year or so. Seeing you in person, but seeing you here is just really heartwarming. So it's lovely to be here. I am Lisa Offringa. I am the manager of scientific affairs and partnerships at Brightseed. Brightseed is a biotechnology company in South San Francisco. Our goal is to discover small molecules in plants. We use chemical analysis techniques and machine learning to predict the different health areas that these bioactives can influence. And it's primarily a discovery platform. So it's a pretty exciting combination of a lot of different aspects of plant sciences and ethnobotany at its core. Oh, and I am going to pick Anna.
Thanks, Lisa. It's nice to see you. And it's so inspiring and humbling to be here speaking with this group. I feel like I'm home. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, and I am an independent researcher. I work on food metrics, so mainly 2 projects on global monitoring systems. One on monitoring the cost and affordability of healthy diets, so access to healthy diets globally, and the other on measuring what people eat, so measuring diet quality globally. And this is very much tied into kind of UN and global monitoring systems and national governments and shared global goals like sustainable development goals, which might seem sort of a far cry from ethnobotany, but I think in the Q&A, I'll explain how I got from ethnobotany to where I am now and how it's integrated into everything that I do. Most of you here don't know me, I would imagine, but I know you. I know many names here very familiar to me because you were my guides and mentors 20 years ago when I was a young student trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the world. And I was studying plant science at Cornell University. First, I was studying plant breeding. And as a part of that, I had the opportunity to talk to rural farmers in Mexico about why they choose varieties of maize in the place on earth that has the most maize diversity. And then shifted towards ethnobotany with Professor Eloy Rodriguez and did some work in the Peruvian Amazon on medicinal plants. And, you know, Jan, Pablo, Mark, Christian, a lot of other people whose names I probably can't see. I know your names so well because I poured over your work. And your work has really woven into my values and my understanding of the world from an early age. I just want to show evidence. While I was a student, this is Pablo's book, and I read it so much. It wove into everything that I did. So it's really inspiring to be here following Pablo's talk to kind of have a chance to explain how much that wove into what I do now. Thanks. I think Mark is next.
I'm Mark Plutkin. I'm an ethnobotanist. I've had the honor and privilege of working with tribal peoples from Oaxaca to Argentina. Most of my work focuses on the Northeast Amazon on the Suriname-Brazil border. Also have a major focus on Afro-Amazonian peoples, who I think are the forgotten peoples of the Amazon, particularly in Suriname with the Maroons. I host a podcast, Plants of the Gods, Hallucinogens, Healing, Culture, and Conservation, which, as we all know, are deeply interconnected. And I'm just glad to be here and have a chance to participate. And felicidades, Pablo.
Wonderful. Thank you to all for introducing yourselves. And I would like to kick off our discussion today by asking you all, tell us what your job is and what choices in your education or your experiences along your life journeys have led you to the career that you have today. I'm going to give each speaker about 3 to 4 minutes tops. I know that's a little time, but so we can move along. We really want to hear all of your perspectives. They're really valuable. Plus, we have a couple more questions along the way. And I think that system works on us kind of calling the next person. So now I would like to start with Mark.
Well, I'm the president and co-founder of the Amazon Conservation Team. 25 years ago, I saw a huge gap in conservation efforts in the Amazon, that nobody was addressing indigenous peoples and indigenous land. You had groups like Cultural Survival focusing on indigenous cultures. You had groups like the World Wildlife Fund, where I was working, focusing on saving trees and elephants and whales. And they never talked to each other. As an ethnobotanist, I knew and I saw that indigenous peoples, and in some cases even peasant peoples, are the best stewards of the land. So we set up the organization to focus on this issue of biocultural conservation. And to date, we have been able to partner with over 100 tribes in South America to map, manage, and improve protection of about 90 million acres of ancestral rainforest. So at the age of 19, I was a college dropout working at Harvard and found a night school course on the botany and chemistry of hallucinogens taught by Richard Schultes. So I took that course, and in a way, I'm still taking it. So I bounced around quite a bit, but I think that any ethnobotanist worth her his salt, trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up. Will there be a job for me? Nobody knows what the future holds. We're all in uncharted waters, but ethnobotany involves being comfortable, familiar with a lot of disciplines: language, anthropology, botany, economics. And I think what great preparation to deal with such uncertainty. And when I hear students or prospective students in ethnobotany say, well, gee, I don't know there's going to be any jobs. You have companies being capitalized to focus on psilocybin, $2 and $3 billion, billion with a B, and they don't have a product yet. Cannabis is the number 11 product, number 11 most valuable crop in this country. And if you add in the illegal, it's number 2, only after corn. So the idea that ethnobotany is some sort of self-limiting field, I wholeheartedly reject. And let me just finish by recommending what I think is the most important piece that everybody should read, particularly those of you who are in school, graduate school, college. Gary Nabhan's piece on the future of ethnobotany. It really is a roadmap for what's ahead, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So that's it from my side.
Thank you, Mark. Do you recommend who should go next?
I'm a great believer in alphabetical order. So Betsabe, we have an A in there somewhere, I think. I don't have all the names in front of me.
Well, we have Anna and Annie. Let's hear from
Yes,
Annie.
exactly.
Great. All right. So I, like Anna, work on a lot of, at the moment, work on things related to very high level, international level around the Sustainable Development Goals and the Convention on Biological Diversity. And the core of my work right now is really working to use spatial data and maps to bring together diverse groups of stakeholders in different countries to look at what is important to them and where they can prioritize protection, management, and restoration of nature. Mainly, this is working at the national government level, and depending on the country, we're able to bring in various Indigenous peoples groups and other stakeholders to make it a very participative process. We also work to support about 140 governments in their commitments to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and have a spatial data platform called UN Biodiversity Lab that supports them to access and use spatial data and maps in these commitments around planning for nature, implementing those plans, and monitoring their effectiveness. So I'm aware this seems very far away from ethnobotany. I got to this role because I originally started work at UNDP with our Equator Initiative, which really works to advance amazing Indigenous peoples groups and local communities that are working at the intersection of conservation and sustainable development around the world. And I worked on that for probably about 4 years before transitioning more into this work. But I think to explain more about how I got here, I want to go way far back to university, which was I studied biology, and I studied my own major, which was local and global social change. So I kind of hopped back and forth between a summer in the lab, a summer working with grassroots organizations, and it was very separate. And after I graduated, I read about ethnobotany in a book and decided that this seemed like an amazing way to kind of knit together those various sides from the molecular level all the way up to the human systems level. So I spent over a year trying to figure out where graduate programs were, finding the Society for Economic Botany, seeing all these names who had been on all the papers I had read. And I eventually ended up at the PhD program between the New York Botanical Garden and the CUNY Graduate Center, like Lisa, also on this panel. So unlike Lisa, I did not finish my PhD. I left with a master's. My advisor left midway through, and I had a choice to move with her or to continue in the program. And I'd always been more interested in the intersection of science and policy and practice than in academia. So I started looking around. I landed an internship with the Equator Initiative that turned into a job which was a dream for me because it was really working with a lot of the communities and principles that I had been working with as an ethnobotanist within the UN system and figuring out how to elevate those. And that's eventually transitioned into the position that I have now, that is really working to bring together science and policy and practice within projects in different countries. So that's me. Let's see, let's hop around this time. I'll go to Sonia.
Great, thank you. Really amazing to hear of the dynamics around the study of ethnobotany. And as I stated in my bio, I'm really a natural product chemist who is working within the field of ethnobotany, ethnomedicine. To bring some context into why I established the nonprofit entitled the Biocultural Education and Research Program. My journey also hinged around the studies linked to my PhD, in which my interest then was discovering these new chemical entities, as I always had an interest in discovery. And I chose a plant which we call horse-nicker, and its systematic name is Cisalpinia bonducella. And as I began to probe these leaves and plants and roots, etc., seeping into my consciousness was the importance of our history. Barbados is really unique in being a major outpost for the transatlantic slave trade. And we are within our post-colonial society still dealing with the outfall of the horror of what happened in the 1600s to the 1800s. And vestiges of that still permeate within our society. As I was doing my PhD, we also had a pharmaceutical firm come to our campus, and they began to sample as many of our plants as they could, looking for a target for hepatitis. And the culmination of things that were happening as my thinking was modified led me to think that we have a biodiversity, we have a historical tradition, we have an ancestral
Betsabe, Sonia has frozen for me. I don't know if that's just me. It's also you.
She froze for me too. Let me message her.
I think she is also frozen in Nairobi.
Even here in Maseno on the equator.
Great. So maybe we'll move to the.
Nakuru also.
She's also frozen in Chile.
Great. Well, let's move on to Anna.
Yeah, and if we have, we can loop back to her. I'm trying to contact Sonia.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry to interrupt what she was saying. Sounded really interesting. So we'll hear the rest of it when she comes back. So let's see what I do. My job is I work on global food indicators. And in that vein, I have two main areas of work. So one is working on access to healthy diets and institutionalizing the cost of a healthy diet as a global indicator. And that's a metric which looks at the market level cost to access diverse diets that meet dietary needs. And this has recently been adopted by the UN institutions as a global indicator of food security in the last two UN flagship reports on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, which I think is really important and is the main purpose of why I work on this, because it's shifting the focus globally on food from just calories and a narrow set of foods to an awareness of the need for a diversity of foods for both human health and the environment. And to measure the cost of healthy diets, we look at the cost of the same food groups around the world, but locally specific items, which are the most available and affordable items in each place for actually accessing a healthy diet. And that, in part leads to the conclusion that in some places where markets don't provide access to affordable healthy diets, there's a big need for other ways of accessing them, like wild collection or cultivation in small gardens and other ways of accessing food than purchasing. And also the need for diversification in the food system in many different contexts. So the whole reason of working on that is to bring awareness to diversity and bring awareness to locally specific resources for engaging with and utilizing diversity, in the interaction between humans and the environment. The other project I work on is measuring diet quality globally. So again, this is also based on diversity. The main effort here is to create brief, low burden questionnaires that are specific to each country in the world, which are very easy to implement for a global monitoring system. And to do this, we we take the same food groups globally, but the species and the specific foods are specific to each country. And I have a team of people working with me, including a lot of people who have anthropology in the background, where we've interviewed over 600 people in the world so far to tell us about foods that are available and commonly consumed and culturally important, to include them in the country-specific global surveys. And thanks, Lisa, for your inputs on the Thailand questionnaire based on your expertise. So really the effort here is to measure diets. The input data is essentially a global ethnography of food. So looking at food this way in both the cost and the consumption of food is a direct result of ethnobotany because it has to do with there are certain things we all share in common, basic human needs, biological needs that are the same, but there's knowledge and information and understanding that is locally specific. And we try to tap into that in each of the indicators. So like as Pablo was saying in his talk, bringing the voices and the perspectives of people from the ground up and letting the people's voices be heard as reflected through global indicators. So listening to the people first and then using our knowledge to recognize the knowledge that exists everywhere. I just briefly wanted to come back to Jan's initial point on how the sacred fits into what we do. And to me, the study of plants and the study of food and diversity is it's basically a celebration of the sacredness of what exists on Earth. And the effort to reorient global indicators, which become shared targets across countries by governments and UN institutions and global dialogue is, in my view, it is sacred work because it's our responsibility as humans to understand, to honor diversity. During my studies as a student, I came across the term nutritional extinction, which refers to when a plant is not extinct, but the knowledge of how to use it is lost. And when I see either species extinction or nutritional extinction, I see devastating and profound disrespect of knowledge, of ancestors, of the abundant resources we have on Earth. And it's reflected in our own health as humans. So there's a Korean saying I keep in mind that a land and a body are not two different things. Our nutrition and what we eat reflects our connection or our disconnection with the Earth and multiple species and each other. So when I see, the US typical diet, which is a lot of ultra processed foods, a lot of unhealthy foods, lack of diversity of species, it is reflecting to me profound disconnection with the resources on Earth that are available to support, our own health and planetary health. So my motivation in this work is to change the story globally, away from narrowness to celebrating diversity and creating targets to improve, fostering maintenance of diversity in each different place. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Now we have Lisa, unless Sonia is back. Let me see. Sonia, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, but let the next speaker go on while I check on the stability of my connection.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sonia. I started my work at Brightseed about 4 or 5 months ago, and I was really drawn to the company because they are making this connection between people and plants. They're looking at these small molecules that haven't quite been discovered in plants using mass spectrometry and different analytical techniques, and finding the ways that those could potentially influence different health outcomes. So as somebody who is a medical ethnobotanist, it really fit into my interest. It really plugged kind of every bit of not just my career path, but also kind of my personal interests in things. One of the benefits for me working at Brightseed is that I really understand every piece of the puzzle, except for, I will be perfectly honest, the artificial intelligence and machine learning is a place that I am not as well versed in, and learning every day about it. So that's been exciting and just really fascinating. It's so interesting to me. We have a number of different people who have PhDs in plant sciences, and yet we all know different things. So it shows that as a career panel, that really shows to me that you can go into a field and just go in so many different directions. And I love talking to them because it's like we all know the different parts of a plant. So at Brightseed, we've been able to illuminate over 700,000 different compounds at this point and map them out to many of the different kind of health issues that are happening in the world today. We look at medicinal plants, we look at food plants. Those are kind of the highest level ones. We identify their molecular signature, and we're looking at kind of illuminating the dark matter of plants, of the plant kingdom, hopefully potentially moving into fungi and some other areas soon. In terms of my career path, it has been, as the Beatles say, a long and winding road, and one that I have thoroughly enjoyed. Essentially, it's what I like to call soup to nuts medical ethnobotany. So another way to put it would be what I've learned is kind of soil to supplement. So starting with, the botany and the anthropology, going into the botany, phytochemistry, pharmacology, that was all part of my PhD. And the pre-work that I did prior to going into my PhD program, I found out about ethnobotany and dove in the deep end, and went back to school and learned about everything botanical at San Francisco State, and the California flora, which is one of the reasons I'm in the Bay Area. I then went and did my PhD at the New York Botanical Gardens in the CUNY Graduate Center under Dr. Michael Balick, studied medicinal plants in northern Thailand for memory disorders. It took me a second to remember that, actually. And then I did my postdoc in the nutrition department at Stanford. After that, I taught at UC Berkeley, I taught at Stanford, I taught at San Francisco State, I taught at a number of different places. I really enjoyed teaching, and then moved into industry as a product developer in the nutraceutical industry. And so that, really kind of, like I said, taught me just soil to supplements, kind of the whole shebang, if you will. And then I ended up at Brightseed, where I think I've been able to really integrate kind of every bit of my learning into my job. So quickly, my day-to-day job really involves operations. I work within every one of the projects that we do at Brightseed, working with all the different scientists and making sure their pieces all connect. I work with the marketing department to make sure that everything that we're putting out into the world is scientifically accurate. And then I also work with the business development team in tech sales when it comes to really describing our technology using the correct terms. I'm on the phone to kind of answer those questions and make sure that we're providing people with the right information. So it's really been a wonderful path, and I'm just very grateful to be here and be able to share it with you.
Thank you, Lisa. I see Mark has his hand up, but Mark, do you want to make that comment now or after Sonia speaks?
Let's wait for Sonia, please.
Okay, all right. Sonia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I was going to suggest that because it's late, 10 years here. I keep getting messages that my connection is unstable. So at least I get an opportunity to make more of a contribution. It was great to hear about the chemistry being involved. I always say it's like music to a chemist's ears whenever we begin to hear about molecules and natural products from plants. I was a chemical educator before and after I pursued my PhD. And my reason for getting into research really was the desire to be part of discovery. I remember very early in my bachelor's, someone asked me, well, why am I studying chemistry? And my spontaneous response was that I would like to discover a target to deal with cancer, which at the time had quite a perspective where it was a problem at our national level as globally, but it was on everybody's mouth in terms of how do we deal with the cancers and the different type of cancers that were showing up. And that was a genuine interest. So I pursued my PhD after I thought my children could deal with my absence and my husband would pick up the slack, as it's always important to have that support. And I chose to work on a plant called Cisalpinia bonducella. And the focus was on the root of that plant to discover a class of compound called furanoditerpenes. And I was successful in that I discovered about 13 new novel furanoditerpenes, and we got published, etc. But as I looked deeper into plants, that important interface with people was showing up in my face more and more. And the more I read, the more I talked to persons, seeping into my consciousness was the trauma, the residual trauma from within our post-colonial society, as we were still dealing with the outfall of being an outpost for the transatlantic slave trade. We had lost a lot of our biodiversity in the 1600s, 1700s, when monoculture for sugarcane was the thing. And this, bioprospecting became an issue for me as I became more aware. And I remember while I was on campus, a pharmaceutical company got engaged, and they were sampling as many of the families and species of our plants as they could. And I felt that we needed to have our people engaged in this instead of waiting for persons to come in and tell us about that value. And that value stretched way back in the 1600s and 1700s, as our mainly African descent population relied on this biodiversity for survival. They relied on this biodiversity to heal their wounds. They relied on this biodiversity to augment nutrition, which of course was not adequate. And I felt that I had to take up the duty of reconnecting our public with our past heritage and bring that relevance into our future. And one of the first things that I did was to survey our rural parishes to see if I could find the linkages to that heritage. And this was within the boundaries of ethnobotanical study. I'm a chemist, a natural product chemist, but I quickly understood the sensitivity required in terms of going into a community and probing to find that important value point, that important value perspective. And I must say that as I did this and I accumulated data, and then we began to look for further inspiration, and I began to look internationally. And of course, I came across the Society for Economic Botany. And I remember attending the Chicago meeting around 2007. And while I was doing my PhD, actually, the NAPRA Alert database that was established by Norman Farnsworth was a lifeline for me in terms of finding the quality of information I need to supplement what I could obtain from my campus. And it was amazing for me to actually see and hear him speak. It was amazing for me to actually hear the multitude of presentations that were delivered with such sensitivity for that people and plant interface. And that really cemented for me that I had to look beyond the secrets of what was in the roots, the leaves, and the seeds of these plants, but what were the secrets in terms of the people and how they use the plants. And this propelled me to continue. It led to me establishing a nonprofit, and I am really working heavily within that plant and people interface because our people need that reconnection to their value. And I'll stop in a few seconds. Only today, I heard of one of our centenarians. We have quite a vibrant centenarian population here. And today I heard of one of those members who is 107. Today is her birthday. She was born in 1914. She would have been exposed to all of the diseases of the period. And she would have had to survive based on traditional knowledge because there was no designated healthcare, public healthcare system in that period. And I think for me, those are the heroes that I want to get closer to. I've begun that, I've begun working within that dynamic, our centenarian population, and the general elders of our society, because I think that ethnobotanical heritage is so valuable that we need to unearth it, we need to elevate it, and we need to see the relevance to our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. I want to invite Mark. He wanted to make a comment as well to kind of close up this question and move onward.
Just a common thread that's run from everybody's presentation, from Pablo's to Sonia's, is that of diversity. And when you look at the job market and when you're in PhD programs, there's an emphasis to force people to focus down on one thing, one species, whatever. But for example, the biggest money in ethnobotany right now is in cannabis. Okay, like I said, it's somewhere between the second most valuable and 11th most valuable crop in the US. But you walk into a cannabis dispensary and they don't hand you a joint and say, this is cannabis sativa. You've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of varieties. Okay, I'm in a workshop this weekend also, the Fantastic Fungi Summit, which has got 120,000 people signed up. And guess what they're talking about? Psilocybin. But, you know, Glenn Shepard 10 years ago found 8 new hallucinogenic or mind-altering ergot alkaloids in Peru. Wade Davis 20, 30 years ago found a new hallucinogenic fungus in Ecuador. So I just want to encourage people to resist this effort to just drill down and specialize in one thing, one chemical, because that's what capitalism does. You know, they just want to turn everything into an Iowa cornfield. And being an ethnobotanist means you got to be comfortable with diversity. And just to champion what everybody said, starting with Pablo, you know, how do we protect that diversity, both botanical and cultural, and in the case of these hallucinogenic frogs, zoological as well. So that's my point.
Thank you, Mark. I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to transition and move forward to a couple other questions. And I'm going to ask if we could keep our comments to 3 minutes, just in the spirit of time. I honestly have a hard time cutting you off because I love hearing from you. So we will do our best. But my next question to you all is, what role did mentors, the networks that you created and fostered or tapped into, and even community played in your career path? And I want to start with Anna.
Thanks. Mentors, have been everything in my career path. I have never gotten a job that I applied for. My work has always been through the connections with people. And I understand the word networking now better than I did when I was in college. In college, I found the word networking to be an intimidating term, something that I was supposed to do. Now I understand it as something that's very natural. You connect with people who you enjoy working with and learning from. And that connection and shared values and shared joy is what provides the light for your next step on your career path. That's been my experience. I just gravitate towards the places and people and topics that I really care about working with. And that seems to be how every new step has been taken rather than anything formal. So mentors were always the ones who were connecting me with opportunities, particularly for travel and learning from people in very different environments than my home environment, which just expands the network of, all the influences that create new understanding and connection. So that's sort of a general answer. I mean, I could go into specifics on very specific important mentors, but I think we all have those specific important mentors. And the key purpose, what I want to say in this remark is just that those are the fuel that drives each decision towards what you care to work on. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. Let's hear next from Lisa.
Thank you. So I have to agree. Mentors are everything. They were instrumental in shaping my path and helping me figure out who I was and what I wanted to do as an ethnobotanist. I'm still in touch with many of my mentors. I just submitted a paper with my postdoctoral advisor. I think I'm having dinner with my mentor from San Francisco State in a couple of weeks. And I'm doing some work with Dr. Balick on a separate project. So I mean, we're still in touch, and they've just been an immense source of support for me. So I really can't thank them enough. In terms of networking, I also share with Anna that kind of cringe when it comes to the word networking. But really what I found is finding that community. I was able to find that community within the Society of Ethnobotany. The Society of Economic Botany. I'm getting ahead of myself there. I especially kind of before I went into graduate school, going to those meetings and finding the people who were doing the work that I was interested in, that was something that was advised to me, and just, trying to figure out kind of who was doing what you wanted to do. I found friends and colleagues at the meetings, and have continued those relationships throughout my career. I'm also a fan, I don't want to tout any particular social media platform, but I am a fan of LinkedIn. I feel like it's a place where I can go and find out what people are doing and read articles of interest of what people are doing. And so I'm a fan of that kind of virtual networking, especially when we weren't able to get together in person. So I think that about covers it. There are a number of other Society of Economic Botany, the Botanical Society of America, Society for Ethnobiology. Like, these are all places where people go with a common interest and a common kind of desire to move plant knowledge forward. And I think that's just kind of finding your place in that can be really helpful. I'm going to go with Mark.
Okay, well, my mentor is Richard Schultes, which is, I guess, the equivalent in ethnobotany of having like a lifesaver or something. But I do want to recommend a wonderful book, which is not about ethnobotany, but it has the best discussion of the mentor archetype. It's called The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. It's a long and interesting story, which I won't get into now. Maybe we can get into this in the next discussion section. But I do want to point out that I believe that mentors wear many masks. And nobody should have just one mentor. You know, your parents can be a mentor. Sometimes a mentor can be somebody you just met once. Some of my great mentors have been shamans I've worked with. I've been very blessed that way. So I do think it's important to look for a mentor. And I also think it's equally important to realize when you have a mentor, and that a lot of people never find one. I think that's really something that when you meet somebody who's like, well, I never figured out what I want to do with my life, or I'm just kind of directionless, or I was in graduate school, I never finished my degree. In many cases, the problem is I didn't find a mentor. So yes, I agree with virtually everybody. Mentors are absolutely essential. We need to find them, and we need to look for them, and we need to celebrate them when we have them. So next.
Let's hear from Annie.
All right, I'm going to try switching and just going through my computer for audio. I agree with everyone, so I'm trying to find new things to highlight within this. I would say for me, from undergraduate through to where I am now, I've had incredible mentors who have really helped to guide me and provide me with the feedback needed to become better at what I'm doing. For networking, I would also echo a lot of the things that I heard from Anna and Lisa. I'm an introvert, so to me, often the idea of going out and networking is stressful and feels like a big task. And what I've found is, for me, it's more about building relationships and community within my professional sphere, and Society for Economic Botany was a huge place for me and really felt like home when I was doing my graduate research. And I've found that in my work at UNDP with various groups. And to me, really making those genuine connections and building out that community is what enables me to do that as an introvert, and also means that I then have a huge network of people to reach out to that really help me to consider how to make my work better, or to make sure that it gets to the right people, or any number of things. So I will hand it over to Sonia, I think is the last person on this question.
Thank you, Annie.
Yes, thank you very much again. You know, I've said this before, that establishing a nonprofit looking at biocultural traditions was not in my bucket list. I wanted to be that chemist, that natural product chemist, who discovered natural product targets for our chronic health issues. I wanted to, as I said, discover something for cancer, and that's something that I can tick off my list, but I can talk about that a little more. I wanted to look at the issues of diabetes and hypertension, two very chronic illnesses impacting on again, our post-colonial society, diabetes especially, because we can imagine that in terms of diet, our ancestors were probably feeding on sugarcane, as there was easy access to grab one of those canes and maybe hide behind the hut and at least get something that felt nourishing in our stomachs. And therefore, the ability to recognize sugars we've been overdosed within our blood is just not there. And diabetes is a big problem within our society, to the point where the impact of COVID has been really drilling down into those people that are suffering with diabetes and hypertension. And it's really distressing to have the numbers of persons perishing daily, and we then hear that they've had the comorbidities of diabetes and hypertension. But in terms of mentoring and networking, it really was my exposure to SEB, as I mentioned before, that gave me the confidence to understand that I needed to bring people more into the work that I wanted to do, that I had to have a stronger platform to strengthen that plant and people interface. What were the plants that were used for diabetes and hypertension throughout our history? Can that guide us, whether it's to developing a modality that does not require going through extensive drug development? It could be a tea or it could be other forms of intervention that we could develop based on a research platform, and again, based on traditional knowledge. So, you know, there are persons that I wish to single out, and please understand that I'm not ignoring that overall SEB has been very nourishing to me. But I do recall John Rashford acknowledging that my work within our community in terms of reconnecting to the value of our traditions and our plant biodiversity, in asking me to write a chapter on medicinal and cooling teas of Barbados. And only recently that chapter has been incorporated in our national archives. And to me, that is one of my signature moments. I also remember Jan Salik, who I know is in the audience, hosting me at the Missouri Botanical Garden and making sure that I understood the importance of all of the departments at the garden. And that fueled my interest in where my nonprofit could go, because I did visit there on the cusp of me registering the nonprofit. And her work on biocultural collections has informed a lot of what we're doing in our nonprofit. We're producing documentaries, we're collecting the artifacts from our history, and we are packaging it differently. We have an amazing coloring book coming out shortly that is looking at our traditional use of our trees, but we want to bring that out in terms of the beauty of our fruit and foliage, because often we miss that. So, you know, very important for me, as I said, was that exposure that I gained from networking within SCB, listening to all of the presentations by our DEBs and all of those working within the ethnobotanical field. And it really has enriched my understanding and my confidence as I go forward. And though the nonprofit is relatively new, I think that I am achieving a lot of what I want to under this new and important platform of plants and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. All right. Lovely to hear about everyone's perspectives. Now I want to transition to a very compounded topic or question, and you are all welcome to choose which of these questions you want to focus more on. But Mark had a set of questions he wanted to ask, which are: what classes do you wish you have taken while you were in school? And also, are there any courses you would recommend for up and coming ethnobotanists? So that's one side. The other sort of question that I'm interested in exploring is, how has your training in ethnobotany prepared you for the work you do today? And can you mention some of the skill sets that you've learned through doing ethnobotany that you apply at your work, if any? So you're welcome to choose either, mentioning classes or skill sets that you picked through your ethnobotanical training, and how does it apply today in your current job position? And I would love to start with Lisa.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute myself. So I use just about every part of my ethnobotanical training, except actually being out in the field as in my job. You know, my understanding of kind of all of the pieces of ethnobotany, I think, is why I was hired at Brightseed. I understand, you know, the phytochemistry, I understand, you know, the plant sourcing aspect of it. I understand the clinical trials, the product development, the understanding of human biological targets. So all of those pieces have allowed me to really kind of get my fingers in all of the pies and all of the different projects at my company, which is really exciting. And part of that is because ethnobotany is so multidisciplinary at its core. So when you talk about, you know, what classes I took, it ranged from full-on anthropology. I probably could have gotten my master's in botany if I had taken some additional courses. I would say some of the courses that I wish that I had gone more deeply into were things like statistics, just really learning, like having a strong statistical, and I think now, you know, kind of computer analysis set. I think some other people will probably speak to maybe some of the mapping technology that's available and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, every way that humans use plants is at the core of ethnobotany. So really just looking at like where you are interested and finding out how that applies to maybe the job that you're interested in or the direction that you're interested in going, and taking the courses that apply to that, because they may be outside of kind of the traditional set of classes, and just to make sure you make that exploration, especially as a student, you really have the opportunity to kind of do what you want, and just really pushing that line and saying, you know, this may not be in my core set of courses, but please, I would like to take it. I think it would contribute to my career. So just knowing that and really kind of advocating for, you know, what you want out of your education. Oh, I'm going to go with Sonia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be short and talk about the skill set. You know, as a chemist, I was thrilled that I got my grounding in chemistry. And I think that, as everybody here has identified, as we expand, you know, our options, I think without an ethnobotanical grounding, we can elevate our experience and elevate how we operate within the system, within the expected standards. But in terms of skill sets, one of the most important when we're working within that interface is plant identification and a firm grounding in taxonomy. We know that when you go into these communities, you hear of plants being named very often with similar common names, and therefore it's very important and vital that we do, you know, differentiate between what the family that the plant belongs to and the genus it belongs to, and of course the species. So firm grounding in taxonomy. I want to say that even when you're grounded in taxonomy, you still always need to reach out, because sometimes all you have are a few leaves or a stem of a plant that is considered important, and it's difficult to place that into a family, a genus, or even a species. So it's that grounding in plant identification and taxonomy, and of course, reaching out beyond databases to the experts in the field. Interviewing, the interview process is very important, because sometimes we may get caught up in the act of doing the interview and not focus on getting all the information. As Pablo said, we need to make sure that we are documenting the use of the plant for its medicinal value, but also important is its food value, whether it exists in the current period or whether it was valuable before, because here in Barbados, we have a number of plants, and I know that Pablo said he doesn't like the term underutilized, but we have a number of plants that are currently within that category because we've lost touch with their value. And therefore, in the interviewing process, we want to know that the use of this plant in throughout our history and current, and also spiritual. We need to get a full understanding of the value within our community. And of course, data management is vital. What do you want to get out of your data? How are you going to use it? And how will it inform your activity? Or how will it inform other persons who are researching in the area? So I think that those are important skill sets for a young person who is embarking into this very exciting field. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. I also wanted to add to the current questions. A student in the chat mentioned, in addition or on a side note, I would like to ask the panelists if there are any online or free resources or books that you would like to highly recommend to the aspiring ethnobotanists. And I know Mark mentioned some of Gary Napalm's books, but open to you all too as well to mention some resources for our students. Oh, and let's go with Mark.
Gary Naban's written about 40 books, and they're all gems, but the two first are the two best, which is The Desert Smells Like Rain and Gathering the Desert. And even though he's working in a dry desert environment, and, I'm working in a wet tropical environment, the stories are the same. So I find his writing just absolutely inspiring and a good roadmap for all of us, whether you're starting your career or whether it's winding down. So I'm sure everybody has their own personal favorite, but that's where I would start.
While we have you, do you have any classes that you would have loved to take previously, or some that you would like to recommend?
I do. I remember a conversation vividly I had with Schultes, where he said the problem with science is it's run by scientists who are never trained to manage anything. And so the best scientists end up managing. So they're going to get to do the fun stuff, and they're not very good at management. So I would recommend to anybody to take some basic management courses. I mean, this is useful for life. It's not just whether you're running an organization or not. Number two is mushrooms. Mushrooms are big and getting bigger. I can't recommend enough that people need to have a familiarity with mushrooms, which most of us who were schooled in angiosperms really tend not to know a lot about. This is a big area. It's going to keep expanding. There's enormous amounts of money. And on the whole, hallucinogens have just exploded in a good way in terms of treatments for incurable diseases. There's centers for hallucinogenic studies at Johns Hopkins, at Harvard, Yale, NYU, UCLA. New ones are opening all the time. And this is an area you need to be familiar with as you're trying to make yourself as employable as possible. Third thing is to echo what Sonia said, plant ID. A lot of, most, I would say, colleges and universities have gotten rid of basic botany, but you got to be able to tell these plants apart. I took a wonderful course a number of years ago, identification of tropical plants by vegetative characteristics. One of the most beautiful, useful courses I ever took. I don't know if it's still taught, but you really need to know how to ID these things, and learning how to do it with dead plants in a herbarium is just not sufficient if you're going to be working in the field. So those are my big three.
Thank you, Mark. So we haven't heard yet from Anna or Annie. Let's start with.
Oh, I think you want to mute right when you said who you were going to start with, but I can jump in and then pass it to Anna next. So working within a big international organization, I think one of the major things I bring with me from ethnobotany is something that's run through all of the comments today. And this is a humility and a recognition of the fact that whoever is living in a particular rural area or locality, whether it's indigenous peoples or local communities, they have the best answers for that area. They have so much more knowledge than I can ever bring to the work that I'm doing. And so especially working within international development, continuing to bring that up, whether it's with the national governments we're working with, whether it's bringing indigenous peoples and local communities into the conversation, that's something that humility of knowing that I have tools or resources at my disposal, but my role is to understand how I can use those to support communities or national governments in their work is something that I carry really strongly with me. In terms of practical skills, agree 10,000% with Mark on the fact that scientists end up in management positions with no experience. Highly recommend some basic background in that. For me and my position, two of the most important skills have been solid writing and the ability to interact with scientific research or read a scientific paper and be able to communicate the key insights and findings in a way that policymakers or communities understand. So that ability to communicate is something that is almost more important across my entire program than specific subject matter expertise. Obviously, that's really important too, but those kind of day-to-day skills in terms of project management and communication are huge. And then one final thing that I would recommend, since this is a non-academic career panel, is that when I was in my PhD program, I went to so many career panels, and they said, if you want to end out outside of academia, hide your PhD on your CV. No one wants a PhD in academia. And it was so depressing. It was awful. I don't agree with that advice now, but what I would say is that often non-academic organizations want to know that you have an ability to do the type of tasks I was talking about, like communication or project management, and aren't just rooted in academia. So I know when you're doing your PhD, there's so much to do, but if there are any small things you can do, sign up on UN Volunteers, participate in the student committee for Society for Economic Botany, see if there are any intern or volunteer positions at a nonprofit organization, and build that network and get that experience on your resume as well. I think that can really help to transition from academia into some of these other positions. So with that, over to Anna.
I could build directly on your emphasis on communication, which I fully agree with, by emphasizing listening and our role as scientists to be on tap, not on top. And with regard to practicing that skill of listening, there really is no substitute for traveling and being in places where you're learning from the entire experience. It's devastating in COVID that has largely been removed as an option for the time being. But almost everything I learned about listening and understanding realities for many different people has been through traveling. Spending several months living in the Peruvian Amazon and sleeping in a hammock gives you a different experience of understanding the ecosystem than you can ever get from reading. Even Mark Plotkin's papers, which are wonderful. Going there's just no substitute. You soak up an incredible amount of insight and understanding. And you have insight into the values and rational choices of people. So, things like how agricultural scientists are trying to convince a lot of farmers in various countries in Africa to grow orange flesh sweet potatoes for nutrition. And, the choices of some people to not adopt those because the leaves are more of a focus of importance for them than the sweet potato itself. And that's a rational choice that you understand when you're used to listening to the diverse ways that people use plants, or experience directly that I had in a program promoting the traditional vegetables in East Africa, that there was a nutritional promotion element to that, which was trying to have messages on the iron and vitamin A content of traditional leaves. And, whether that's going to resonate or not with people, like the way in Kiswahili, the word for traditional vegetables is dawa, which means medicine. And people understand some of these dark green leafy vegetables as medicines for anemia. That's what resonates rather than iron-rich foods. So having that understanding of the way that people think in different ways and what values and lenses they use is something that you get only from really interacting and listening.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Anna. Thank you so much for that input. I also wanted to mention, I love seeing all your engagement through the chat. So please keep your questions coming. I want to exhort panelists too to keep looking through some of the questions that are popping through the chat. There's a lot of recommendations and questions coming in, so definitely just keep going. And I'm trying to copy and paste as much of those as we can, because I do think we should have a section on resources for students on different subjects, books, courses, etc. So
something that we will be looking into for sure. All right, I want to transition to the next question, and that is, what advice do you have for someone training in ethnobotany today? What do you see as future job prospects? And I would like to start.
Let me interject, please.
I'm sorry, Omari, you have a question? You're muted.
Want to run home because the curfew is at 10 o'clock. But what I want to say is that the challenge we have in the developing countries is that nobody wants to study ethnobotany because most of the jobs are geared towards employment. And if you tell them to do ethnobotany, who is going to employ them? Because there is domination by people from other disciplines that are going to engage them. So this is not possible. And my experience is that I came into ethnobotany through the background from agriculture. And I found it very interesting. And I regretted having wasted a lot of time doing agriculture that everybody is aware of. So the challenge today is who is going to finance you if you are in ethnobotany?
Mm-hmm.
My professor is there, Paul Mbugwa. I think he will agree with me that we get fewer students as time goes by.
Thank you, Omari. Let's see how we can weave. Oh, sorry, you haven't finished. You're muted, Omari.
Yes, so maybe what we could do is actually rebrand the programs that we have. Then we will get people training in ethnobotany because the information that is out there is amazing, and I don't think we shall ever finish them. And it's okay that the students I'm supervising in ethnobotany, they only come to me and they want tailored approach to ethnobotany. They come from natural products chemistry, as Sonia was trying to say. And it is a pity nobody is working on agricultural ethnobotany. Or the challenge that we have today is that the biodiversity is disappearing as a result of pastoralism and ecological erosion. Nobody's documenting that. When it comes to vegetables, the people that are working in that area will only document the plants that are high yielding. How about the ones that are not high yielding? Does it mean that they are useless? Yeah. Yeah, I hope I'm not deviating or distracting the whole discussion. It is quite interesting, but I have to go.
I think you bring up a really important point, and it's how do we train the next generation? And this is what this question is geared towards. I wanted to point out a comment that Gil put in the chat, which is academics are not in departments of ethnobotany formally. We are all in different disciplines, but we do ethnobotany. It is also a problem with grants who find it difficult to fund multidisciplinary work. So maybe we can weave a little bit of this into the questions as well. So I'll repeat the question just for sake. It was, what advice do you have for someone training in ethnobotany today? And what do you see as future job prospects? And maybe adding with Omari's comment is, how do we inspire these younger generations to continue pursuing these lines of work? And let's start with.
You muted Betsabe before you said the name. Sorry.
Let's start with
Did you say me?
Yes, Anna.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I think that Omari, his points are absolutely spot on. And it's a real issue to address. I mean, so in my personal experience, I wanted to do ethnobotany because I found it fascinating and compelling and important. But when I graduated from my bachelor's degree, I faced a situation where I wasn't getting any jobs because the jobs that I wanted were to, travel and do ethnobotany, and nobody wanted to hire somebody with a bachelor's degree. And there really weren't that many opportunities anyway. So I took a lab job because lab jobs were plentiful, and I had a science degree, and realized during the course of that year after college that I need to figure something out if I want to do work that deals with plants and people, because the career path for ethnobotany looked like it was headed straight for academia. And I wanted to do real world work on, not that academics don't necessarily get to do real world work that has impact, but I wanted to work with, organizations and agricultural institutions that are doing programs and policy and making change. So that's why I went towards food. And I brought ethnobotany with me into food, which I think has been hugely beneficial. But in terms of attracting students into ethnobotany so that they can then take those skills with them to whatever else they do, I think that is a very important question. I don't have an answer.
And do you want to pick someone else to go, Anna, or should I? Okay, let's have Mark.
Well, the big growth areas in environmentally related careers right now, from my perspective, are sustainability and climate change or climate change mitigation. Both issues that are second nature to any and every ethnobotanist. So I do think that it's important not to think, well, if you want to get a job in ethnobotany, you need to have a chair at Harvard. Those days are gone. So ethnobotany by its nature is interdisciplinary. And knowing where the areas of growth are, I mean, I met with Costco a couple of years ago about some potential partnerships. It didn't go anywhere, but they got a vice president for sustainability. And most corporations either have one or have several or moving in that direction. So you need to be looking at that stuff before you get to graduate school or when you're in grad school, and not getting out with a PhD in something and then wondering where the jobs might be. Again, hallucinogens are a big, big, big area and only getting bigger. And if you think how many attorneys there are in this country, and you think how many PhD ethnobotanists there are in this country, there's obviously way too many lawyers and not enough ethnobotanists. And I think these are three areas that are big and getting bigger. So if you orient yourself that way, I think you'll find yourself in pretty good shape. But I like what Anna said about, I went into food and I took ethnobotany with me. That's a great approach and a great line, which I'm looking forward to stealing. Thank you.
All right, let's hear next from Annie.
Sure. I would just say that Gail put a great comment into the chat saying that I think if you do good work that you love and that you work hard and produce good quality work, that you build a network and opportunities open up around you, which I think has been very true in my case, with a lot of luck as well. I think in my world, there is increasing recognition of the importance of engaging with Indigenous peoples and local communities. So for anyone who hears about international policy, there is a big movement going on right now called 30 by 30 to protect 30% of the world's land and seas by 2030. And it's widely acknowledged that that can't happen without active engagement and participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities. So there are so many initiatives that are working to bring that knowledge of sustainable land management into some of these broader conversations about policy and implementation and international commitments at the national and international levels. There are so many NGOs, both smaller NGOs working in specific countries or only one country, and some of the big NGOs that have large programs of work around what they tend to call Indigenous peoples and local communities, but it's ethnobotany. And as Mark said, a lot of companies are really interested in this now. I have a colleague who just got hired to manage Apple's nature-based solutions portfolio, primarily because she had a lot of experience already working with Indigenous peoples and local communities, and they were really interested to expand their portfolio that way. So in my part of the non-academic sphere, there's more and more opportunities to do this work. And my experience transitioning from academia to UN work was that people were all talking about the same things and doing the same things and calling them differently and not talking to each other. So I think there's a lot of that, and very happy to help make connections to anyone who's interested in more of this type of NGO or policy level work. And I think Sonia might be the last one for this round. Or no.
Sonia and Lisa.
Okay.
The other problem we have, madam, is that most of the people we deal with do not understand what ethnobotany is. And that is a very big problem today. That is the challenge. Very few of them understand what we are supposed to do and what ethnobotany means. They think it is just like, for example, I'll give you a very good example. If you come to Kenya and you want to talk about the medicinal plants, they think you're just going to train herbalists, which is not the case. Anyway, and it is, if you want to talk about agriculture, you get Davis know-it-all from the agronomists and plant breeders. So these are the challenges that we have in the third world. Nobody understands us.
That's a great point. And sometimes the unspoken burden that we all carry because we are representatives of our field. And I definitely understand that struggle. I'm currently in a department where I'm the only ethnobotanist. And that is true of many of us here in this call today, which pushes us even further to advocate not only for our work, but our field as a whole. So I think the future of ethnobotany is with all of us and how we are self-promoting and reshaping and defining this field as we move along. That shows a perspective from a younger graduate student, by the way. I'm not on the upper levels yet. I'm gonna pause there, and I wanna hear from the people that we haven't heard yet to kind of conclude this round of the panel and open it to additional questions that you all might have. So if we could hear from Sonia, and I think we also are missing here from Lisa, if we haven't heard already, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Betsabe. Only recently, I took a group of undergraduate students from the University of the West Indies Cape campus into our key biodiversity area along the eastern side of our island, the Scotland district. These are undergraduates who were studying ecology, biochemistry, chemistry, economics, and even in some cases, drama, creative arts. Because I saw the importance of exposing them to this interface of plants and people and the potential for them to segue with their knowledge base into this area. Because it is so vital as we work towards attaining our sustainable development goals. As we look around at the challenges that we're currently facing, climate change is very evident. These severe incidences of fire, outbreak, the increase in temperatures that likely fuel that, increase in drought periods, increase in excessive weather and flooding, increasing diseases. We see the need for young scientists, young scholars with a multidisciplinary platform. We need to have a conduit between the policymaker and the practitioner on the field. And we need our young scientists to bridge that gap. The policymakers, unfortunately, seem to have little confidence in science and the importance of it in terms of guiding development and sustainable development. Sustainable development. And we need our young scientists to be armed, and we need them to function at that conduit interface, get into the field, probe the knowledge. We hear of the Aboriginal communities in Australia talking about the fact that they had a strategy for limiting the outbreaks of fire and the devastation by doing controlled birding, and they knew where to do this and what species had to be involved. And if that knowledge is there and that knowledge could prevent the devastation that we're currently seeing, we need to get that packaged into a framework that we can get the policymakers to see its importance. We know the structure is there. We need our young scholars to assist in packaging that so that our policymakers can see the relevance and act appropriately as we look for sustainable development. I also want to answer this from a personal level, in that as you pursue your ethnobotany, regardless of where you see your niche to be aware that you're going to be challenged. You're going to be provided or presented with hurdles. You know, I have been dealing with a very personal hurdle myself. And I stepped away from ethnobotany and my chemistry because I had to find a way to deal with this personal hurdle. And I recognized that what I needed was to develop the strength to walk with my hurdle. This is not going to get smaller for me, but I had to become stronger in dealing with that hurdle. And therefore, if I put that into context for a young person who is studying ethnobotany, you're going to meet hurdles, not necessarily the personal ones like the one I'm dealing with, but professional ones can show up. And what you need to do there is to strengthen yourself to grow and get taller to step over those hurdles, whether it requires you to strengthen your skill set, whether it requires you to do more networking, whether it requires you to work on your mentorship. What you need to do is to make sure that you're strengthened to walk over those hurdles so that you can continue and make a difference, because we really do need the youth to take us into this new dimension where we can put us back to a place where we are more sustainable. Sometimes I'm thinking that maybe we've gone too far, but we must be hopeful, and our youthful cohort, we hope, can get us there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, for your beautiful words. I feel them wholeheartedly, really. I think we haven't heard from Lisa yet, and we have someone with, Paul has a question as well, but let's hear first from Lisa.
Thank you so much. And Sonia, I really appreciate what you had to say. I believe in what you're saying 100%, and the future of ethnobotany is really the future of the planet in some ways. So I think it's really important to focus on a lot of the things that you are saying. I'm going to go as quickly as I can because I realize we're growing low on time. So my advice for any student really that I've spoken with is thinking about what you want to do every day. So what do you want to wake up in the morning and do? Do you want to be outside? Do you want to be in the classroom? Do you want to be in front of a computer? Do you want to be speaking to people? So really, I think, kind of deep down in your heart, we have these things that we want to do, but yet they don't always translate into like what you wake up in the morning and do every day. So I think finding that connection can just be really important as an individual. The other part of it is just speaking to my knowledge of what's going on in available opportunities within kind of the ethnobotanical plant-based field is, especially in the Bay Area, is a really big push on plant-based foods. So there's a lot of development in that area. I think it speaks to sustainability. I think it speaks to, food and the importance of food. Food as medicine is coming up quite a bit. And then also, one of the things I noticed when I was looking for jobs outside of academia was really, if you are interested in food, you're interested in creating any of the plant-based products, having a background in food sciences. So that was something that I was specifically was missing, but is something that was really important as I was looking at some of these jobs. So that's just another area that is kind of growing, at least out here. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for all your answers. I'm still processing a lot of what has been said, really. I'm just very, very grateful to have the 5 of you in this panel today. I want to open it up. We are at time basically, and we're about to transition to breakout rooms, but I want to open the floor for at least 1 or 2 questions. I know Paul has his hand raised, and you're welcome to unmute yourself now, Paul, and ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Actually, not asking a question, but just making a comment. And the comment is in relation to what Amuka has just mentioned about the relevance and the importance of ethnobotany in Africa, particularly, and Kenya in specifically. And we are saying there's so much that is going on that the recording is not as fast as we should be having it. And that's what he mentioned is actually very correct, that we have a lot of students who come and take agriculture. Ethnobotany is not one of their choices, unfortunately. And it's because it's hardly understood, and there is a lot of groundwork to be done. But I agree, yes, the future is in the hands of the ethnobotanists, people who are studying plants that are least known, and yet they have so much potential. There is so much that we don't know as yet, and some are disappearing. That's the bit that's always very scary about ethnobotany, that some of the plants you may be studying, you may be the only one who is getting that information from the indigenous people, the people who are using them today, and you don't know whether they'll be there tomorrow. That's usually the sad part of the thing. However, there is hope, and the hope is in the young people, as just has been mentioned here, the young people who take up ethnobotany and actually believe in it and work on it and keep growing it. There is a lot of future and a lot of potential is available. But one of the problems, as again mentioned by Amuka, is that we do not have many people funding. That the funding is a big issue, because the people will fund agriculture. There's food. We need to eat better food and so on. But these plants that are not well known, the plants that are least known, neglected crops and so on, indigenous crops, indigenous fruits and so on. Nobody is studying them. That's one of the problems that some of us face, even as we take students at master's, undergraduate level, whatever level, you find that there's a lot of neglect. And I think that is one of the things that we as a Society of Economic Botany, I'm sure we can be able to have an input by encouragement, having fora like this ones, where we are encouraging and starting and pointing to our young people. This is an open field that is not filled. It's yet to be covered. There's so much that is not known. And yet we are going on with other areas, high development, yes, but forgetting some of the very basics that we need so that we can move on together with the plans that we don't understand. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, for your input and comment. Mark also had a comment. Mark, can you? Are you here, Mark?
Yes. Just to tie together what the previous speaker said and going back to what Pablo said, and the thread that's running through all of this, my buddy Tim Ferriss, the podcaster, said, you know, ethnobotanists by nature are boundary walkers. We're the people that have to stitch this stuff together. So here we are, you know, finding all these new and cool things to eat. And here we are watching the world get fatter and sicker, eating monocultures. And here we are watching these disease-resistant varieties disappear due to climate change. So there's no lack of challenge here. And I can't think of any field that's better positioned to address all these things and stitch them together, because that's what we do. That's our nature. So I'm trying to figure out how to use this to, not only seek employment, make the world a better place. I mean, we got the best toolbox in the business.
Indeed. Thank you for your comment, Mark. All right, if we don't have any more questions from the public, we're going to transition into breakout rooms. In these breakout rooms, you can self-select what breakout room you want to go into, but we'll have specific breakout rooms, one per panelist. And John has already set them up. John, is this ready to go?
Yes, I just opened up the breakout rooms and they're each named after a different one of our panelists. You can choose whatever panelist you'd like to spend a little bit more time with to ask them some questions in a more chat-like atmosphere. You can move between those breakout groups, so you're not committed the whole time. I think you might have to come back to the main lobby and then choose another panelist. I think that's how it works. But I've just now opened up all of the breakout rooms and you should be able to now join them. And I asked the panelists to join the one, of course, that has your name on it. And what I'll do is about a couple minutes before we get to 3 o'clock, in order to respect everyone's time, I'll pull everyone back in and we'll close things out there. So you have you have 15 to 20 minutes to have a little more intimate chat. Panelists, you'll be kind of your own moderators here, although Betsabe will float around, and if you need some help, can offer that. I will be staying in the main lobby for those that come back and forth. So I invite everyone to now go ahead and do that. Hopefully, Betsabe, you can confirm, is it open for people to join?
It is, and people can select next to each person's name and hit join.
Right, so and I think it's at the bottom, you'll see something called breakout rooms, and you click on that and then choose which name you'd like to join. If anyone's having any trouble, I see there's still about 50 people who have not broken out. Just let us know in the chat if you're having an issue. If you don't know where to go, I'll suggest Lisa's group, Anna, or Annie, which have a few less people at the moment. Okay.
So there's a comment in the chat. Yes.
Yeah, I see for some reason it says not joined, even though there's a couple of them that don't seem to actually, they're trying to join, but they're not actually joined. I'm gonna see what I can do. Oh, and someone to stay in the lobby. You can do that if you'd like to have general discussion amongst yourselves, although I might have to talk over you at some points as we try to do some logistical things in the main lobby. Okay, and some people want to be assigned to rooms. Let me see if I can do that as well.
Yeah.
So,
it could also be a thing with their settings, their menu settings. So they could check on settings, breakout rooms, that it needs to be enabled or verify that the setting is enabled.
It does seem like people are now, most of them are green and they have been able to join. And there's just 18 left. Okay, I'm just. Okay, I imagine there's probably quite a few people that are just going to stay here. So yeah, if you'd like to stay, let me see. Should I click on the name? Yeah, to those that are asking in the chat, you can just click on the name of the panelist that you want to join. If you're having a specific problem, I'm trying to move you. So let me know which group you'd like to be in if you're having trouble. Okay, Natalie, I will try to do that. Anyone else? There's a lot of in the chat, so if you have not been able to move into your preferred room, let me know now, and I'll try to assign you to that room.
I'm gonna start moving around, John.
Yes, go ahead.
Let me know if you need me. Okay.
Okay, great, thank you.
John, I'm telling you here because I can't enter the chat for some reason. I'm reading the comments. I don't want to go to a.
Okay.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Heike. If anyone has just joined in, if you had been coming back and forth, everyone's now in breakout rooms for the next 10 minutes. And you can join those breakout rooms by going to the bottom of the screen and clicking on breakout rooms and selecting which speaker's breakout room you'd like to join. Colombe, I see that you want to be added to Anna Herforth's breakout room. It says, okay, let me just check. I don't see your name, so I have to find you. Just one moment.
I don't see him either, John. I'm wondering if it's that settings issue that SEB mentioned.
Yeah, it must be. Colom, check your settings to make sure that you can join breakout rooms. I don't see your name listed at all for some reason. You're the only one I don't see, so I don't know why that is. You might have an outdated version of Zoom. That sometimes happens. If you haven't gotten any updates to Zoom in the past year, probably, because I think it was about a year ago that there were updates that allowed for breakout rooms. So that might be why we don't see you. Yeah, I see your note, Colum. It must be a technical issue with Zoom. And what I can suggest is that you, in the few minutes remaining, if you can try to update your software on your computer or re-log in. Maybe just try re-logging in, and I don't know why I wouldn't be able to assign you unless there's something on your end that needs to be updated. Oh, I do see that actually I now see your name in Annie Vernig's room. I can move you. Let me try to move you to Anna Herfith's room. So it says I moved you there, but it says not joined. Amelia, just for your knowledge, that must have worked because it looks like they are in Anna her fourth room.
Okay, good. I did notice a couple other people had not joined, so I'm trying to look that up and see what it means.
Yeah, if I feel like maybe they need to confirm or something.
Ah,
Can I try to, what happens if I try to assign you to a room and then you can come back and tell me what happens? Are you okay
sure.
with that? Okay.
Go for it.
I'll assign you just to a big room like Mark's room.
Okay, I do have to press join.
Okay. Amelia, I pulled you back, but I don't know Were you not able to just bring yourself back?
No, I don't think so. I think you'll have to pull people back. I could go to different rooms, but I couldn't come back.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Okay, at least people can move between rooms.
Yeah.
By the way, I really appreciate you taking another Saturday.
Oh, that's okay.
That's fun.
I took yesterday off in the
Oh, good.
office, so it evens out, and I got a lot of my work done while I was listening to this great bunch of speakers. So
Perfect. I appreciate it. Everyone has about 60 seconds to return back to the main room, so we're just waiting for everyone to jump back in, and if not, they'll automatically be populated into the main session. Okay, everyone should be now slipping back into the main session. I hope that it wasn't too unceremonious, that you're in the middle of a thought or a discussion, but that's usually how it happens. I want to just end this by thanking all of you so much. All of our speakers, of course, are amazing. DEB, Pablo Eyzaguirre, all of our panelists who played such an important role to further the ideas of how we continue to have a next generation in ethnobotany doing all the different diverse work. As was mentioned, we are the ones who are combining these disparate fields to innovate and do new things that will change the world. And we are the guardians of that knowledge. And it's the mission of our society that we disseminate that information and keep it going through the years. So I want to encourage everyone to please become a member if you have not already. Econbot.org is where you can sign up for membership. I know I've been plugging it a lot, but we need members to keep things going. We do have a conference in Jamaica along with the Society of Ethnobiology, which is our sister society. We do fully expect the conference to happen in Jamaica, and we hope to see many, if not all of you there. We will have safeguards in effect, and we're working through all of that to make it as safe and effective as possible. But I just want to close now and thank you all again. Please feel free to reach out to me personally if you'd like, president@econbot.org, or reach us through the website. So thank you all so very much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.